If you go out for a jog, you're probably going to burn some fat. If you go out for a bike ride, you're probably going to burn some fat. But what's going to get you there faster? What's going to get you that fat burning stage quicker? Running or cycling? Both are obviously good. I'm not saying any one is bad, but I want to look at the data to see what's going to give me the most bang for the buck. So let's break down a few pieces of research and really figure it out. Before we get into this, sleep is imperative. It's undeniable. We need sleep. Today's video is sponsored by Helix, which is the mattress that I use. My wife and I love it. It's so easy to get. Like, you go online, you take this little quiz that'll help you determine the best kind of mattress for you. But the cool thing is with Helix, my wife takes the quiz, I took the quiz, right? And then at the end of that, it breaks down, here's the best kind of mattress that's for both of you. So you can both agree on. So I'm not asking for the firmer mattress while my wife Amber is asking for the softer mattress. We find that middle ground. So there is a link down below where you can save up to $200 off of a Helix mattress, plus get 2 pillows. Okay, so really cool deal, but also you will find that there is a 100-night sleep test guarantee. So if you don't like it after 100 nights, call them up, they'll take it back, no questions asked, super easy peasy. But I'm telling you, like, it's the first mattress my wife and I have ever agreed on. It makes it so that when we go out of town and we even stay at like a nice hotel, we're literally missing our Helix mattress at home. It is a game changer for your sleep, game changer for like tossing and turning. Like if Amber's moving around or she's not feeling good, finally it's not keeping me up. So my experience has been awesome. Then it gets delivered to your doorstep, super easy. You don't have to like be holding on with your hand over the roof of your car in a Honda Civic. Don't have to do that. It just gets delivered right to your doorstep. So check them out and save up to $200 down below in the description and get those 2 free pillows too. Okay, before we get into specific running mechanisms versus cycling mechanisms and chemical response with fat loss, let's talk HIIT versus continuous for just a second. There is a study that was published in the journal Obesity. Okay, so with this study, the first group, for 15 weeks, 3 times per week, it had them do 20 minutes of HIIT. Okay, 8 seconds of sprints, 12 seconds of recovery, repeated for 20 minutes. Okay, the second group did 40 minutes of continuous cardio. Okay, in this case, they did it at 60% of their VO2 max. The results were pretty interesting. HIIT ended up burning significantly more subcutaneous fat than the continuous. Now granted, the continuous wasn't a super high intensity, but still pretty interesting. Now the mechanisms behind this could be a number of things. I mean, for one, you have an increase in overall intensity, which is probably drawing in more fuel. Okay, you have an increase in the fatty acid utilization post-workout with HIIT, a little bit more, okay, because you're done. Your oxygen is still, you're still in oxygen demand, so fatty acid utilization is in demand, some more lipid utilization there. Okay. Additionally, you end up having a decrease in appetite because of the catecholamines. Because the adrenaline is spiking a little bit more with high intensity, you probably are going to eat a little bit less or not have much appetite because it's a stress hormone, a stress response, right? But I think the biggest factor that people don't always look at is that towards the end of a high intensity interval training session, you actually start to inhibit anaerobic glycolysis. So glycolysis is where you're using carbs for fuel, like from your body, right? Glycolysis. Okay, well, if you're inhibiting anaerobic glycolysis, then that leaves, well, fatty acid utilization. So once that starts to become inhibited towards the end of your session, you start to rely on what's called PCR degradation, and you also rely on intramyocellular triglyceride stores for fuel. That is another word for fat that is basically in your muscle tissue. Well, what they've found is when you look at the blood, you actually see that after HIIT, there are higher levels of glycerol in the bloodstream. Higher levels of glycerol in the bloodstream indicate that fats have been liberated because glycerol is the fatty acid backbone. So when you release fats into the bloodstream, they're triglycerides, 3 fatty acid molecules bound to a glycerol molecule. The fatty acids are cleaved off and used for fuel, and you're left with a glycerol molecule left in the bloodstream. So when you measure the blood and you see more glycerol, you see, oh, fat has been used. So with HIIT, there was more glycerol. That is a very clear indicator. Anyhow, do HIIT. Anyway, looking at running versus cycling, this is where things get interesting. There's a study that was published in the journal Obesity Reviews, okay, and this looked at lots of different studies. So they pulled data and they took studies that were a minimum of 4 weeks long, so a minimum of 4 weeks of HIIT, okay? But they also took a look at studies that were minimum 4 weeks of moderate intensity continuous training, so HIIT versus continuous. So for both running and cycling, they looked at 85% max heart rate, they looked at 80% aerobic capacity, and they looked at 17 on an RPE, rating perceived exertion scale. So basically, they were looking at lots of different studies, and they were able to pool all this data together to get a lot of information. So what ended up being better, running or cycling? Well, running ended up being significantly better for fat loss than cycling, and even better for abdominal fat loss. Here's what it looked like. Running, both HIIT and MICT, those groups lost about 2.6 kilograms of fat. That's pretty profound. That's a lot. Okay, what's interesting is in this particular study, the continuous group lost more fat, but the continuous group was also working at a much higher intensity than the previous study that I referenced with continuous. If you were to work at like 80% or 85% max heart rate, that's intense. And if you try to carry that out for a while, you're gonna burn a lot of fat. Now the cycling group, on average, only lost about 0.5 kilogram. That's pretty interesting. Okay, so what is the mechanism here? Why did the cycling group not lose as much? Well, when you look at running, the overall involvement of the body, there's a lot more muscle mass involved at a sub-maximal level, running versus cycling. Now, when you start getting into super high intensity, you might be able to say, okay, yes, cycling, you're getting the full body involved, but running, you're moving the upper body, you're moving the legs, you're using the hammies, you're really using a lot of body, and body through space is really going to be good for metabolic drive. Now, what's interesting is you start looking at other studies, you see that with running versus cycling, once again, running ends up having a higher post-exercise oxygen consumption rate, 37% higher. So running after a run, your body goes into oxygen debt much worse than it does with cycling. Again, because you're moving that full body and a lot more involvement. That is a very big piece of the equation we have to look at. Okay, but one of the biggest things to factor in is the catecholamine response. Okay, when you are running, you have a higher catecholamine response. You have more in the way of adrenaline, more in the way of norepinephrine, epinephrine, and that's been measured, right? So running elicits more of this fight or flight response. Well, these stress response hormones, okay, or should I say catecholamines, they're not really hormones. These catecholamines are what really drive lipolysis, okay? If you have adrenaline or epinephrine, norepinephrine, that's going to drive lipids to leave their storage form and go into the bloodstream to give you fuel, okay? So that is one of the main reasons why running seems to burn more fat. The other really good news is that your visceral fat, like the fat that we really want to get rid of, it's the potbelly fat that's like underneath the subcutaneous fat and surrounds the organs, the ultimately dangerous fat. Well, catecholamines trigger more visceral fat to be burnt. So there are other studies that have demonstrated that running burns more visceral fat than cycling. And the primary reason is because you have more beta adrenergic receptors in your abdomen. So if you do have a higher epinephrine, norepinephrine, catecholamine response, like a bigger shock and stressor to your body when you're running, it's going to affect that region more because you have more beta adrenergic receptors there. So the higher the stress while you're working out, the more likely it is to burn subcutaneous and visceral fat in the abdominal region. That is really good news. Now, cycling comes with some pretty powerful benefits though, so I don't want you to just start running and throw away cycling. Okay, because cycling is moving through a very similar plane of motion the whole time, you might find that you end up getting a lot more of that lactic acid burn, right? Like you feel like if you start pumping your legs really hard, you get that lactic acid burn in your legs and that almost makes you quit when you're cycling. If you push really hard when you're running, you're almost likely to get winded first or just hit this weird fatigue wall. Well, that burn in your legs is very, very good because that is a lactate response and that comes with its own set of benefits, okay? So that is going to be good for overall muscle signaling, building some muscle. Overall, just as a signaling device, lactate is really good at conditioning the body to be more efficient. So it comes with some different sets, right? Also, very low impact. So you could cycle for a longer period of time. Okay, there's a very strong argument that if you just keep running and increasing your mileage, you're gonna beat your body up before you ever really start getting the solid benefit, at least if you do it long enough. Cycling is less concussive, so that is a huge benefit. You can also go for a longer duration cycling, generally speaking, okay, because you have less impact and less overall catecholamine stress response. well, that means your body's gonna be preserved a little bit more. And hey, exactly, you're gonna have less of a stress response. But the big one that I really focus on is mentally with running. One of my frustrations, and I like running, is that I can't cover a lot of ground all the time. So if I'm running outside, I can cover some good ground, but if I really wanna cover ground, I gotta start running 100 miles. I could hop on a bike and I can do 100 miles, like literally go do 100 miles. And that is mentally very stimulating. So there's something really refreshing about that. So cross training is super important. But if you're looking for bang for the buck, we combine HIIT with running. Sprinting is probably one of the fastest ways to shred up the midsection as far as an activity is concerned. Okay, so as always, keep it locked in here on my channel, and I'll see you tomorrow.